All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here and joining us. I'm Dr. Heather Kelly. I'm a researcher at USU's Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practice, and I'm going to be helping facilitate today's webinar on dementia and dementia resources in Utah. This webinar is the first in a series of webinars as part of the new Dementia Resource Ambassadors training program. Before we jump into our main presentation, I want to mention that we are recording today's session for both educational and quality improvement purposes. The recording will be posted on our website and YouTube channel, and everyone who registered for the webinar will be emailed a link to the recording. We'll also include links to resources that are discussed during the presentation. So if anything's mentioned and you would like a link to that specifically, you can use the Q&A chat and send me or another host a message, and we can make sure we include links to those resources in that email as well. We also want to acknowledge our funders. This webinar is supported by funding from the Interagency Outreach Training Initiative, which is a collaboration between USU's Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practice and the Utah Coordinating Council for Persons with Disabilities. Before we start, I also want to point out how to use Zoom's AI closed captions in case you'd like to follow along that way. To turn them on, just click the CC button on the bottom ribbon of your Zoom. It should be labeled Show Captions when you hover over it, and then you click Enable Auto Transcription. You should be able to move that caption bar anywhere on your screen to make it easier to read. So again, just look for that little CC icon and you should be set with that. Okay, so I'm really excited about our presenter today, Dr. Beth Fouth. Dr. Fouth is a professor in the Human Development and Family Studies Department at Utah State University, and she is the director of the Alzheimer's Disease and Dementia Research Center. Dr. Fouth's work centers on issues a lot of us care deeply about, caregiving, well-being, and quality of life for people living with dementia, and strategies that reduce stress and improve outcomes for their families. Her work in this area balances high-quality research with community-centered impact. Dr. Fouth is helping to build infrastructure in Utah to connect families with tailored resources and support across Utah. As part of that goal, she is leading the development of the Dementia Resource Ambassadors training series, which she'll tell you a little bit more about later in this presentation. We are incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Fouth with us today. So with that, I will turn the time over to her.
Great. Thank you so much. What an awesome turnout we have. Thanks for sharing your lunch hour with me. And yeah, if you miss anything in this presentation, as we mentioned, it'll be posted on our website. So don't feel like you have to take notes or stress. Just enjoy the presentation, get some information, and you can be directed towards resources as we move forward. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm first going to go over what is dementia, just defining this. I know some folks in this webinar are very well aware of what dementia is. Some of you are professionals in this area, but some of you are students. Some are people from the community that really, don't know as much as they'd like. And so I think that's a great place to start, both for today and for our forthcoming series. I'm also going to talk a little bit about Utah, what I'm calling the state of the state. So what do we look like in terms of dementia? And the real key piece to this presentation is about resources, directing people to know what resources we have. And importantly, this program that we're initiating over the next 3 years, which will be getting all of these resources out to those that are interested throughout the state. So these are the main things we'll be covering today. You probably have some questions about dementia that will not be answered today, but keep in mind this is part of our training series. So we have, at this point, 11 additional webinars that will be covering a lot of the really interesting details about dementia, support, and care. So let's jump in. So we're going to start with the brain. It's a very unremarkable looking organ for the really incredible things that it does. The brain is made up of a series of what we call lobes or regions. They are not color coded. Your brain is very gray and boring, but here I'm just kind of going to toggle back and forth between the gray and the color, so you start to see how some of these regions start to show up. the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. And we'll just talk a little bit about this later, but that's what your brain looks like kind of from the macro level. In order to understand dementia, you really need to understand what's happening at the cellular level, so at the details or the micro level. So I think neurons, which is the brain cells, I think they might be the coolest looking cells in the human body. So don't worry about the small print here. I'm going to cover the important pieces. But this really alien looking thing is a brain cell or a neuron. And I'll go over just some of the key parts. So we've got the center of the cell, which is, the cell body, which is where a lot of the important features sort of happen within the cell. We have these, what I have color coded in blue. These are the areas of the cell, the dendrites, that receive information from other cells. And then in orange, we have what's called the axon. And the axon is what's sending signals from one cell to the next cell. So if you can sort of we'll go over this again quickly. So this cell right here is going to receive a signal from another cell through the dendrites, and it's going to pass a signal down the axon to the next cell, and it will connect. So this is now we zoom in really, really closely. This would be the end of the axon, kind of looks like this little nodule. And then we've got the end of the next dendrite. So the axon is sending information from this cell here to this cell here, and they're doing it through these little tiny molecules called neurotransmitters. And so also I've color coded them. I don't think they're actually in color, but you can see where this cell would be sending a signal from one cell to the next just by releasing neurotransmitters into the synapse or the area in between the brain cells. And then the receiving cell gets that neurotransmitter and it knows to send a signal. And all of this really interesting stuff is happening so fast that we don't even have a chance to even think about it. But um, some of this information is important to understand how things break down in dementia. So we're going to come back to this a couple times. So if this felt a little confusing, that's okay. We'll circle back. All right, so what is dementia? This is a really kind of a confusing term because you'll hear people using Alzheimer's disease and dementia almost interchangeably. I do it too. You'll hear me do it in this presentation. But dementia is actually a term for a cluster of diseases or a bunch of diseases, several diseases that all have the same kind of profile. These diseases affect memory, they affect thinking, processing, the ability to perform daily activities. Alzheimer's disease happens to be the most common dementia. So that's why we tend to often sort of use them interchangeably. But not everybody with a dementia has the Alzheimer's type. Dementias are not caused by aging. A lot of people think that they are, but there's no causal relationship per se. It's just that as you get older, your risk for dementias increase. They do increase significantly in advanced age. So what's happening is that, again, there's some kind of underlying pathology or disease that is getting worse over time. So dementias are progressive, meaning they get worse over time. The symptoms will become more significant as the disease advances, and eventually the person will die from this unless they die from something else before. So as I mentioned, we'll talk, mostly about Alzheimer's disease today, only because it's the most common. I will touch briefly on the pathology going on in a few of the other dementias, but for the most part, we'll focus on Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so how did it get this name? Alzheimer's is named after the scientist, Alois Alzheimer, who identified this condition, many, many decades ago. Uh, and more importantly, let's talk about what's going on inside the brain or what's happening with this disease. So there's a couple kind of hallmarks to Alzheimer's disease. The first is that the brain has an accumulation of a very specific protein. So this protein fragment is in everyone's brain already, but in Alzheimer's disease, it's developing at a much higher rate. And this protein is called beta amyloid or the beta amyloid peptide. And what happens as this beta amyloid peptide accumulates, it actually creates a plaque. And if you think about, it's kind of gross, but you think about the plaque on your teeth, it's this like sticky substance. We think that the beta amyloid peptide is sort of similar. It's this sticky substance that's kind of outside of the cell. So here's a rendering of what that might look like, this kind of cluster of proteins. The other main characterization of Alzheimer's disease is a tau protein. Excuse me. So this is tau is like this really cool structure inside the cell. It kind of gives the cell its function and it allows for um, molecules and nutrients to be exchanged within the cell. And what happens in Alzheimer's disease is that tau protein begins to tangle and sort of collapse in on itself. It's a little harder to see in this drawing because it's dark, but the inside of the cell starts to kind of collapse in and it loses function. And so this is happening, at a cellular level, like one cell, is doing this, but in a dementia, this is happening to more than one cell. It's happening sort of across multiple cells. And so it is damaging the cell function of that cell itself. It's also damaging communication between one cell to the next. So this beta amyloid plaque is preventing cells from communicating with one another. Early on in the disease, in Alzheimer's disease, you see a significant amount of damage in the area of the brain called the hippocampus. So if you were to look right down the sort of midsection of the brain, you would see this very small area of the brain that is responsible for short-term memory. And we knew about the hippocampus for a while through a lot of different scientific study that when the hippocampus is damaged, people have the inability to create new memories or new short-term memories. Long-term memories, the wedding you had 2 decades ago or some childhood memories that are important to you, they tend to fall in areas outside of the hippocampus. But what you had for breakfast, where you parked your car, those things are, going to be new short-term memories. And Alzheimer's disease has a lot of damage happening early on to the hippocampus. In fact, this is one of the ways that they can sometimes diagnose whether somebody has the Alzheimer's type of dementia or another type. So you'll be able to see significant damage to the hippocampus, and that might indicate that this is indeed Alzheimer's disease. So let's circle back really quickly. I just went over the pathology for Alzheimer's, but I know people are interested in the related dementias as well, not just Alzheimer's disease. I won't go into as much detail, but I'm going to cover just a few that people often ask about and have some curiosity about what's going on. First, let's talk about Lewy body dementia. So in Lewy body, we're also seeing a buildup of a protein. So similar to Alzheimer's, it's this protein that is accumulating kind of in clusters in the brain, or what these clusters are called Lewy bodies. This is a very different protein from the beta amyloid. This is a protein called alpha-synuclein. That's not important, there's no quiz, but it is interesting to know that these are not the same underlying proteins that are kind of having issues in these different types of dementia. In Lewy body dementia, we see a lot of symptoms similar to Parkinson's disease. So some of the tremors and some of the other symptoms that you think of with Parkinson's. And there is some similarities to sort of the Parkinson's progression and Lewy body dementia. We will move on to frontotemporal dementia or frontotemporal degeneration or FTD, some people call it that. This is why I showed you those lobes in the brain. Frontotemporal is a different protein than the first two I just mentioned. It is a tau protein, but it's different from the Alzheimer's tau. And it's predominantly doing damage to the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe. And so in frontotemporal dementia, you often see two different sort of types. You see people that have more damage to the frontal lobe, and in that situation, you see a lot more sort of behavioral symptoms and hallucinations, agitation, and aggression. Or you see damage to the temporal lobe, which is more related to language. And this has been in the news a lot lately because the actor Bruce Willis has FTD and he has more damage going on in his temporal lobe. So his first symptoms were not necessarily dementia, it was language. He was having a really hard time articulating and finding words. And they call that aphasia. So he started first with aphasia, seeming like, okay, there's some damage going on to the temporal lobe, but eventually they discovered that this was not just damage to the temporal lobe, this was progressive and affecting other areas of the brain. And so then his diagnosis changed to frontotemporal dementia. Um, the third type of dementia that I'll mention is vascular dementia. And this is basically caused by reduced blood flow to the brain. So your brain has a lot of blood flow, right? There's so much happening in the brain. They need a lot of oxygen, cells need a lot of nutrients. And so if you have problems with your heart and your arteries, your vascular system, so if you have indicators like you're at high risk for heart attack, you're also at high risk for vascular dementia because you need blood flow to the brain. And if there's any kind of reduction in blood flow, so you have some atherosclerosis or some, problems in basically just your heart isn't functioning as well, so it's not pumping blood effectively to the brain, then we will also see the slow accumulation of damage over time to brain cells. So just by highlighting these three different types of dementia, you can see that there is really different underlying pathology, even though people sort of all tend to have some of the same shared symptoms of dementia in terms of memory and brain processing. They're caused by different things. Okay, when we talk about the amount of damage that's done in the brain with dementia, we say it's progressive, right? Things are getting worse over time. I started by showing you this sort of micro level or cellular level damage where we've got the tangles inside the cell and the plaque buildup. But again, this is just one cell. Here in these pictures below, we're zooming out and looking at the brain as a whole. And you can see through this accumulation of white, like white color in these images, this is loss of brain cells, meaning the brain cells are dying. And you can see that there is a significant amount of damage that's happening over time. This is a cross section of a brain of somebody with, a healthy brain versus somebody with advanced Alzheimer's disease. And you can see the amount of loss of neurons, so the amount of brain cells that have died is significant. This is something I sometimes show people when they're sort of having a hard time understanding why their loved one might be having some really significant and difficult symptoms. So, let's say that they're, being pretty aggressive. They're having some hallucinations that are, difficult to manage. Sometimes when you see an image like this, you realize the amount of damage that has happened to their brain is significant. So they're not doing this on purpose. They're not doing this to sort of get under your skin. They're doing this because they've literally lost brain cells that would be, otherwise keeping them, behaving more typically for them. So we won't get into all the causes or risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. We can point you to resources in that area, but I think most people are interested in, is this genetic? Many of us have somebody with Alzheimer's in our family. And so again, I won't get into the genetics of the other dementias, but we'll talk a little bit about genetics and Alzheimer's disease. So there is a form of Alzheimer's called early onset. This disease, this form of the disease shows up in midlife, so often in people's 50s or 60s, and it is a much more rare form of the disease. This form of the disease is mostly genetic. We can definitely identify specific genes that lead to early onset Alzheimer's disease. If you're a genetics junkie, which maybe none of you are, these are the three genes. These are the ones that if you have, these basically the presence of Alzheimer's on any of these three genes, then you are, going to get early onset. There's just something interesting in the very early study of genetics and Alzheimer's disease. We found this gene APP, and it's on chromosome 21. And for some of you, that chromosome is significant because people might be familiar with somebody with Down syndrome. And Down syndrome is trisomy 21, which is when you have a third copy of this chromosome 21. And the reason why we found APP as a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease is because scientists very early on in genetic studies were noticing that by around age 40, almost all people with Down syndrome had some kind of like significant level of this beta amyloid plaque and the tau proteins in their brains. And so by that sort of where do we start in the big genetic landscape of looking for a gene that might cause Alzheimer's disease, they started on chromosome 21 and they found one. They found one called APP. So so people with Down syndrome are at a significantly higher risk of early onset Alzheimer's disease. Most of the Alzheimer's that we see is late onset, or we don't even use that word, we just say Alzheimer's disease. It occurs in late life, so usually in people's 70s, 80s, and older. And again, it's the more common type. The genetics on this type of the disease or this form of the disease is much more complicated. So it's what we call polygenic, meaning there's definitely more than one gene involved. And there's lots of environmental impact on those genes. So we can't really tease apart really well, one gene and one outcome. Like if you have this gene, you will get Alzheimer's disease. There is one gene that has a little bit sort of more more of that one-to-one type profile, although not quite. Uh, this gene is called ApoE. It's on chromosome 19. And they have identified that this ApoE gene is responsible for removing beta amyloid in the brain. So obviously plays an important role in the Alzheimer's process. What's interesting about ApoE, so you get one copy from your mom, one copy from your dad. So we have these sort of profiles that people have. Um, if you got a copy of a 2 from your mom and a 2 from your dad, then we would say that you're ApoE 2-2. Okay, that means you're at significantly lower risk for Alzheimer's disease, and about 7% of the population has that profile. If you have received a 4-4, so you received a 4 from your mom, 4 from your dad, ApoE 4-4 puts you at higher risk for late onset Alzheimer's disease. And about 15% of the population has this 4-4 profile. Most of us are somewhere in between. If you're interested, you can get a genetic test to see what alleles you have. Certainly, some people have done that and been very public about it. But I will mention that even if you have the 4-4 profile, that does not mean you necessarily will get Alzheimer's disease. Or if you have the 2-2 profile, you might still get it. So it's not something where it's a definite. It's just a risk profile. It puts you at more risk or less risk depending on your combination. So let's talk a little bit about Alzheimer's and related dementias. Again, zooming out to all these different types of dementias. We know, like in Alzheimer's, there's lots of damage to the hippocampus. We know across all of these different dementias, we're seeing significant memory impairment. Probably the second most noticeable factor in most dementias is language. So difficulty in speaking, misusing words significantly. This is definitely not that like, oh, what's that word I'm looking for feeling. It's much more impactful than that in terms of language impairment. But this section here, this neuropsychiatric symptom section, is really important for understanding Alzheimer's care and support. So, we know that people are sort of confused, um, but we also know they might be experiencing hallucinations or paranoia. We know people might be wandering, meaning they need, significant amount of supervision from a loved one. Eventually, they may have difficulty eating, bathing, and dressing, so they need really more advanced care. We see a lot of changes in depression, apathy, sort of mood swings, and also just general sort of feeling down and not having a lot of energy. People can get agitated or aggressive, and often sleep is disrupted. And so we won't dive into all of these today because this will be another focus of one of our webinar series, but this is really the key to why caring for somebody with dementia is particularly difficult. Because in addition to, your loved one maybe not remembering who you are, you're also providing a lot of supervision, managing a lot of symptoms that are difficult, providing very hands-on care, and maybe not getting a lot of sleep. So that combination is really sort of makes this much more of a chronic stressor for dementia caregivers. Eventually, as the disease progresses throughout the brain, if the person has not died from something else, they will also start to lose physical function. So they'll lose some of their mobility, they may become bedridden. When we talk about treatment of Alzheimer's disease, I'll just mention there's no cure for Alzheimer's disease or related dementias. Um, Again, these are progressive diseases. There are some treatments, and I will mention that, not curing the disease, but helping with some of the symptoms or slowing. That does exist for some of the dementias. And we'll talk about Alzheimer's disease because this has been in the news in the last few years. Um, some of the drugs for Alzheimer's disease focus on really not the underlying mechanism of this beta amyloid plaque and the tau proteins and the inflammation and the other issues happening in the brain. Some of these drugs really just focus on more of the behavioral symptoms. And what they're doing is this is going back to our cell from the very first slide, right? Where this neurotransmitters, as one cell sends a signal to the next cell, some of these drugs will work at keeping these neurotransmitters in this synapse or in this space longer so that there's a better chance that the receiving cell gets that information, basically gets the signal. So these drugs, they don't have a huge effect size or impact, but they can help in early stages of the disease and particularly at addressing some of the symptoms. These new treatments that you might have been hearing about, again, specific to Alzheimer's disease, These are the first type of drugs that have been approved to actually remove amyloid. Uh, and that's, really exciting. So this is way more information than you really need, but I just wanted to kind of show you a little bit about the process. So we talked about the amyloid plaque. That's sort of the end stage of this beta amyloid process. But beta amyloid kind of goes through different phases where it's a strand, a protein strand, and then it's kind of a couple of strands and a cluster of strands, and et cetera. It just advances to build into a plaque. And this is where the drugs are targeting. So the first drug that was approved of this type is aducanumab, and that was targeting sort of this almost to the plaque stage. The other two drugs that are approved are lecanemab or donanemab. Those are currently approved and in use. And I'll mention that aducanumab is no longer in use. So the pharmaceutical company is not using that as a treatment anymore. But these other two that I still have circles on, donanemab is working on the plaque itself, and lecanemab is working at some of these what they call protofibrils, or this stage of the protein process before it gets to be a plaque. So maybe that's too much information, but it is kind of interesting to see that, when we say removing plaque, it may not be the plaque itself. It might be something that led to the plaque creation. These drugs are promising for sure. This is a new way to look at the mechanism of how to sort of solve, some of this mystery of fixing Alzheimer's disease. But the effect sizes are not huge. So what we're seeing is sort of a slowing of the disease over about, I think it's up to 20% slowing of the disease up to about like 18 months. And so it is definitely impactful, but it doesn't necessarily change the course of the disease. This is a massively huge slide that is giving you way too much information. Um, but the reason why I chose to put it in here is because I think it's kind of promising. So this is from the Alzheimer's Association. This is their drug development pipeline. So what they've done is they've mapped out all the different drugs that are currently being studied. This is as of 2025. And all these details are kind of, if you really wanted to dive in, I could share this with you. But some of them in these red ones, they are working on amyloid. They're still kind of looking at that function of amyloid. Some are looking at tau. If you see some of these dark blue ones, they're trying to figure out how to fix the tau problem. And there's other issues going on as these brain cells are, having issues. And so they're like inflammation, for example. So all of these different drugs, what we're going to kind of get from this slide is that it's probably not just going to help to remove amyloid from the brain. We're probably going to have to work on amyloid and tau and inflammation and the way that the body absorbs nutrients in these cells and things like that. So good news, lots of things being tested, very promising. And I think we can definitely be optimistic that we're making some significant progress in the pharmaceutical landscape. Okay, pause for a second, and we're going to talk about Utah. Uh, we have a long-lived population in Utah. So people in Utah, on average, live longer than other states, which is great. It's a healthy state. We love that. We love having, some of those statistics about people living longer. But because dementias you are at higher risk with age, we then also see more rates of Alzheimer's disease. So these are just some statistics. The number of people in our state, this is from 2020, so these statistics aren't done every year. They're done every, let's say, like 5 years or 10 years, depending on specific statistics that they gather. But as of 2020, we had over 38,000 individuals age 65 and older with Alzheimer's, about 10% of the population over age 65. And what's really interesting here is to see the increase in deaths. So Alzheimer's disease being listed as a cause of death that has increased significantly in our state. Alzheimer's is the fourth leading cause of death in Utah. Alzheimer's is the seventh leading cause of death in the rest of the world. So other diseases are causing more issues in other areas. Alzheimer's is definitely an issue that we are experiencing in Utah. Uh, the good news is this has been on the radar for Utah for a long time. And if these are the different state plans that Utah has developed as early as 2012. So the first state plan came out 2012 to 2017. Second one came out 2018 to 22. And our current state plan, 23 up to 30. And you're like, what is a state plan? Like, what does that mean? It means that Utah's paying attention to the demographic shifts in our state, the increased rates of dementia, and what we need to do to prepare for even more people living with dementia in our state. And so the current state plan has 5 target areas. We want to make people more aware about dementia in Utah. So, what are the risks? What are the symptoms? We want to give support and empower our caregivers. We want to expand our workforce. We want to make sure that we have students and those already in the workforce that are competent in working with people with dementia. We want to expand research in Utah, and we really want to promote the health and well-being of people living with dementia. So inside the state plan, there's lots of interesting sort of measures, like, well, how are we going to do this? There's lots of details on that. We will link the state plan to this YouTube video when we post it on our website. Okay, so when we look at this, sort of how are we going to deal with this or live with this in Utah? We know that there's lots of different supportive measures that are needed for people living with Alzheimer's disease. So just this is a really rough outline, right? We know that that there's going to be medical providers, they're going to be, diagnosing and treating these diseases. We've got nonprofit organizations that are helping with support. We've got education and advocacy. So I'm going to profile a little bit, and this is called a sample, because I know some of you might be like, wait, my organization is not listed up there. I'm purposely only kind of handpicking a few of these things just to see the breadth of resources that we have. Okay, there's many more resources available than what's going to show up on this slide. But I think it's important for everyone to know that the Department of Health and Human Services, we have area agencies on aging, or AAAs, that are positioned throughout the state. And here in Logan, we have Bragg, covers Box Elder County, Cache County, and Rich County. And so throughout the state, we have dedicated, organizations who are in constant contact with the Department of Health and this is sort of one of the many things that they help with, is sort of resources and education for Alzheimer's disease. I'll spend a little bit more time on this organization later, so I'm going to just pause here. We have multiple universities, many more than what's listed here, but we've got universities doing research, providing education, offering clinics. So, for example, Utah State and University of Utah both offer clinical services for caregivers, free services. So this is in partnership with the Department of Health. So many people aren't aware of that. In addition to the research, wait, you have a clinic? Like, yes, we can have people come in and receive resources one-on-one, or professional group can meet with a caregiver. We know we have lots of medical providers. I couldn't even start to list the different private medical providers we have, but I mentioned like University of Utah Health is one. Um, we know we have lots of nonprofits in our state that would be focusing on specific types of dementia, offering support and services. We've got Lorenzo's House, for example, focuses on early stage Alzheimer's. We've got nonprofits focusing on respite, providing caregivers a break. So we have tons of amazing nonprofits in our state that are really committed to this. We've got long-term care, home care, and hospice organizations, as well as their associations that help organize those, very key players in helping keep people at home, and also help people transition well and have adequate dementia care in long-term care. And then we've got lots of different groups involved in advocacy and education. Some exciting things happening with USU's extension over the next couple of years. We'll be rolling out some additional resources. I want to highlight the Utah Commission on Aging. So this is a really key organizer in our state. We've got the Alzheimer's Association. I'm going to go into that organization in just a second. But in case you're sort of looking at this map and feeling a little overwhelmed, what do you think a caregiver feels like when they get a diagnosis and they're like, I don't know who to turn to. I don't know what's available, and I don't know who to turn to. And so what we're trying to do is highlight that there are all of these resources available, but we really need to figure out ways to get people to understand what these resources are, how to access them, which ones would be appropriate for certain types of dementia, and so on. So a really great thing about Utah, something that we're proud of, something that we've been recognized for nationally, is that this is just a screenshot of that prior slide, right? All of these different state resources are in very good contact and communication with each other. So we have our Utah Commission on Aging, which I mentioned, which covers aging services, providers, needs for like older adults in general. They also have sections on dementia, but specifically within our Department of Health, we have an Alzheimer's disease and related dementia coordinating council. So this is literally meetings that quarterly all these folks from all these different groups, plus many, many, many more different groups. We meet, we have conversations, we learn about what's going on in research, we learn about what's happening with, which medications are Medicare approved. I mean, we have these communications with each other regularly. And so, next steps for our state is this is why I added these little sort of people, is we need people throughout the state of Utah to be aware of what some of these conversations are and to be points of contact so that these conversations about what are the resources, what are the advances happening in our state, what kind of advocacy is going on with our legislature, it's not a closed door. We don't want this to be just those as part of this council. We want it to be information that's shared with individuals who have an interest in this, who are caregivers, who have a diagnosis, and so on. So if you look at this map here, you're going to see the design aesthetic that led us to this image here. Okay, so this leads us to our what's next in Utah. We have funding. It's part of the funding for this webinar series. And we're going to have, again, a second line of training, which I'll talk about in just a second, but what we're calling Dementia Resource Ambassadors. And we want to go from this image here of the coordinating council, all of these different amazing support networks in our state, to having people throughout the state, individuals that can say, oh, I know about those resources. I know who to direct you to. And so we're hoping that this training program is going to be actively funded over the next 3 years, and we hope to continue this after that. We're hoping to identify people living with dementia, people who are professionals or paraprofessionals, family caregivers, community members, students, people that just have an interest in knowing, like, what are these resources? What's available? What could help somebody that I love? We're going to call these individuals Dementia Resource Ambassadors. So what this program is this is not just one organization. It's not just Utah State University. This is, we have a group of 4 entities here that are contributing towards this training program. We have the Alzheimer's Disease and Dementia Research Center. That's up at Utah State University, so I'm very familiar with that. We receive funding from the state legislature. We just started in 2022. Much of the funding goes out to promote research in the state. So we support researchers with their studies to try to identify, new mechanisms for pharmaceuticals or better care or how to get information out to the community. But we also focus on building and connecting supportive services. So we are kind of organizing this Dementia Resource Ambassador program. The second organization that's really important is the IDRPP, which is the Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practice. And if you remember from the very first slide, or second slide, I think, that Heather introduced, this helps fund this project. So the IDRPP it's a federally designated university center for excellence in developmental disabilities. And this organization is really key in research, training, and services for people with disabilities, including family members and professionals. So the IDRPP has this vast experience in training how to support people living with disabilities. And so we're taking their advanced knowledge of how to do this well and applying this to people living with dementia and their family caregivers. Key community partners. So we've got the Department of Health. Within the Department of Health and Human Services, we've got the Division of Aging and Adult Services, and that's who coordinates this Alzheimer's Disease Coordinating Council. These folks are linked to the area agencies on aging, so they are well networked out in these rural areas in our state. We have 12 of these area agency on aging. And these folks are here on this webinar, so if you have questions, you can ask. They should be able to answer throughout the webinar series and the training that happens after. We're going to be sharing resources, right? So this is, again, a key community partner for this program. The other key community partner is the Alzheimer's Association, specifically the Utah chapter. And the Alzheimer's Association is a nonprofit. It leads the way to end Alzheimer's disease and all other dementias. So it's not specific to Alzheimer's, it's Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. Accelerates global research, driving risk reduction, early detection, maximizing quality of care and support. And so again, remember, the vision is a world without Alzheimer's. So we're working towards this. And so again, lots of great resources from the Alzheimer's Association. What we're doing is pooling all of these resources together. This is a training program that is co-developed by the Alzheimer's Disease and Dementia Research Center, the Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practice, the Aging and Adult Services, and Alzheimer's Association Utah chapter. So we've decided we don't want to compete with each other, but we're working together. And so, what is this going to look like for our state? Again, our funding that we have for the next few years first starts with this webinar series. Here we are today, the first one here, this overview of dementia. We have 11 more on the books. We'll have probably some after that as well. But for the first year, we really wanted to focus on dementia education. We want to get information out to the public of, people, again, when I talk about the public, who do we mean? People with dementia, professionals and paraprofessionals, caregivers, students, community members. We're trying to get people who just want to have more knowledge about dementia to, have access to this information. And so half of our webinars are going to be targeted more towards somewhat introductory level information, today being one of them. And some are going to be, maybe more targeted towards people already in aging services, some kind of paraprofessional field. All 12 of these are open to anyone. Um, we'll direct you with how to register and find these webinars in just a second. Here's the really, really unique thing that this program is doing. So webinars are fantastic. I hope you've enjoyed this one today. And I hope you attend future ones. But what's really unique about this Dementia Ambassador training is that we are going to identify individuals throughout the state. So people that self-select, they say, I am really interested in all these things that are happening. I want to be part of this group here. I want to be connected with what is the Alzheimer's Association doing? What is the Department of Health doing? What is USU doing? This training program is going to be, if I'm going to circle back through the slides really quickly, but if we think about sort of what we're covering, it's going to be like a crash course in this type of, like, who are the players? What are people doing? It's not so much about, what causes Alzheimer's disease, what causes Lewy body dementia, although some of that can be included. But really, we're hoping that this resource referral program is really understanding this map of what's available, who to contact. And so this ambassador program, I'm going to advance through my slides again. We're identifying people throughout the state who want to be trained on these resources. This won't be an intensive training. We're envisioning maybe 6 to 8 different meetings to get together and talk about these different resources. And in 2026, this is going to be a Zoom format. We're going to be meeting with people, getting to know each other, learning about what resources people are looking for. And then in 27, we're going to move this training to be online and self-guided so that people can continue to get this training even if they weren't part of this 2026 group. We're hoping that this ambassador program is sustained over time, even after this grant ends, and so that we will hopefully keep this network of people in our state who are able to let us know what's going on in their communities, what their needs are. Maybe they can let us know, hey, we got a new support group in our county that we didn't know about, so we can add that to our list of resources. And then we can also, let them know, oh, the Alzheimer's Association has a new training series that they're putting out. It's going to be a way to communicate back and forth so that we're all part of this working system. Okay, I will pause here and I'm going to hand the time back over to Heather because we've transitioned from our lecture phase to what happens after that.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So before we go into the Q&A, just want to thank everyone for joining us today and especially to Dr. Valth for her time. We would really appreciate it if you would all just take 30 seconds to complete a really brief evaluation survey. Your feedback helps us improve these webinars and make sure that they are useful and as relevant as possible. So you can either use the QR code on the screen, or I'm also going to paste this link into the chat so that you can just click on it and complete it there. I think it really is only four questions, so I'm just going to let us have like about a minute for everyone to complete that, and then we'll move into Q&A. All right, as we get ready to move towards questions, I want to highlight that in addition to Dr. Fouth, we also have representatives from the Department of Health, from the Division of Aging and Adult Services. We have Christy Russell and Kate Nedorosdek. And then from the Utah Alzheimer's Association, we have Stacy Culp. So you can please feel free to direct questions to them as well. For questions, you can use the Q&A function. It's on that same ribbon where we have the captioning down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And so you can just submit questions through that function, and we'll do our best to to as many of the questions as possible before we end at 2 today. Um, you can also submit questions later to our team via email, which is provided on this slide here, adrc@usu.edu. We also have a link here to our website where you can learn more about us and this really exciting dementia resource ambassador series. So we have the link and the QR code that will take you right there. There's also, once you get to the website, a link where you can sign up to say, hey, I'm interested in being a part of this dementia resource ambassador series. Um, so we'll leave that screen up with that information for you to access, and then I will just wait for to see once some questions start coming through.
Yeah, just a quick note too. So each webinar in the series is going to have a different registration link. And so they're on our website, they are not available yet. They're not posted yet for the subsequent webinars, but they will be very shortly. We just have to create these individual links. And so when you go to our website now, you can see the list of topics that I showed that we will be presenting on. That's all available, and the dates and times. But the actual, you'll have to go back to the website to find the link to the registration. But you're also able to let us know that you want us to email you, or we can give you these registrations right to your inbox instead of you having to come to our website as well.
All right, so we got our first question, and it says, I have a family member who is showing symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. The doctors have mentioned that doing reading or Sudoku, and even exercise helps with decreasing the chances of progressing the disease. How can those options help with decreasing the progression of the disease?
That's a great question. We actually do have a fact sheet that we've created that's available through USU Extension that explains some of the mechanisms of how this works. But yeah, basically, um, if you think about the brain, and actually, I can go back to, I'm going to go back to this really first early picture here because I think it's going to be helpful. Um, when you look at the way that the neurons connect with one another, right? So this neuron is sending a signal to this neuron and also to this neuron over here. So when you're doing things like Sudoku and you're challenging your brain, you're learning a new language, you're learning a new instrument, you're actually building connections that didn't already exist. So you're taking a neuron that, let's say, wasn't talking to this neuron over here yet. By doing some new tasks and challenging the brain, you're actually getting a connection to be made between these new neurons. And so why that's important is that when you do a lot of these cognitively stimulating activities, you're building this kind of wider, broader network of neurons that can all communicate with each other. So then let's say you get an amyloid plaque that starts to develop between this cell and this cell here. So there's a big amyloid plaque sitting right here. These two cells can't communicate anymore. Well, because if you've done a really good job of kind of using your brain, stimulating your brain, stimulating new growth and communication between brain cells, this cell may have a workaround. They can say, well, I can't go this way because there's a plaque in the way, but I'm going to go communicate to this cell over here. And it's kind of a detour, right? It's a way for the brain to continue to communicate through these really advanced axons and dendrite communication networks. It's a workaround. So again, I'd be happy to provide more like a more detailed information about how that works. Um, I'd love for actually one of my community partners to talk about the exercise piece too. I can go to the slide where, oh, and I don't have a good slide for that here. I was going to say we could talk about the blood flow to the brain, but does anybody from my community partner list want to talk about the importance of like physical exercise and activities?
I would be happy to jump in real quick. I was going to drop it in the chat. It doesn't allow me to do it to the whole group. But to piggyback on that, through research, we now know that there's a number of things that you can do to reduce your risk of cognitive decline. And so, the Alzheimer's Association, what we've done is compiled a 10 healthy habits for your brain. I was going to drop that in the chat, but if you go to alz.org/healthy habits, it does talk about the exercise, keeping your brain active. We know what's healthy for your heart is now healthy for your brain, of course, but the impact that it can do to reduce the risk of cognitive decline. So I just wanted to jump in and share that with the team.
Yeah, and as I mentioned too, when we post this video, we'll include links to those, the state plan and things, the healthy habits and things that Stacy just mentioned too. So, but um, yeah, are there other questions? I saw somebody ask for the link. I think for some reason I'm allowed to share, so I'm going to find that because I know that resource really well.
Thanks, Beth. I just dropped it in our internal chat
Oh,
that I have
perfect.
access to. So if you don't mind just copying and pasting that,
Yeah,
that'd be great.
yeah, thanks.
Thank
I
you.
That's an interesting feature for everybody attending today. This is our first time doing this, so we're learning all the idiosyncrasies of the webinar format of Zoom. I'm just going to go back to this other slide for people that missed
All right.
some
So
of
we
the
got
research.
another question, and it's asking with Alzheimer's disease, I think specifically, what are the main symptoms?
I'm going to put you guys on the spot too. Christy or Kate.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Um, with Alzheimer's specifically, what we tend to see is memory impairment, challenges with memory first. There are other dementias where we'll see memory issues being part of other dementias, but not with every dementia, or it's not the prominent symptom that we'll see with every dementia. But yeah, with Alzheimer's disease, we'll see some challenges with memory. Beth talked about the hippocampus area, and so when there's damage in that area of the brain, that's when we see issues with memory. Language, so of course, communication. So as Beth mentioned, as your brain is trying to, your brain cells are trying to communicate to each other. Your brain is trying to tell your body what to do and how to do it. So answering questions, asking questions, formulating sentences, all of that takes a lot of brain work to do. And when you have disruption in your brain, when you have challenges in your brain due to Alzheimer's disease, then things can get mixed up a little bit. So language can absolutely be impacted. You can see the neuropsychiatric symptoms that Beth also went through. And again, uh, a presentation in the future on this a little bit more, but um, again, thinking about what is happening in your brain, and your brain is telling your body what to do and how to do it. So difficulty eating, bathing, dressing. If I'm trying to um, pick up a pen on my desk, my brain has to tell me all the different steps to go through to take a look at that pen, extend my arm, grasp the pen, pick it up, click it, start writing with it. There's a lot of steps that my brain is telling me to do. And when I have some damage in my brain that's disrupting that, it's going to be tricky for me to incorporate all of those and to be able to do all of those tasks. So this is why we tend to see a lot of issues day to day with care, and why individuals with dementia are needing support from friends and family members to complete these different tasks.
I just put something in the chat too. The Alzheimer's Association has 10 warning sign information, and those are kind of like the early symptoms that show up. So, what to look for. I reiterate, if you lose your car in the Walmart parking lot, do not panic. Okay, everybody does that. But if you forget that you have a car, or you forget what color your car is, those would be sort of more significant kinds of memory issues. So there's a spectrum of sort of like what's typical aging, what's typical for every human who's busy. Um, but this sheet is helpful for some that are pretty specific to Alzheimer's.
All right. We've had a couple of questions come through, but we're almost at time. So I'm going to just kind of combine a couple for our final question. And I think we're looking specifically at the most promising cures and whether anything has done to potentially regrow the brain back into healthy functioning.
Yeah, that's you guys are awesome. You're coming up with really good solutions. That there's something I kind of wanted to show here though. Um, when we have the beta amyloid plaque that's built up, and we start to see those tau structural issues, we cannot reverse that at this point. I mean, we don't have the ability to sort of regrow once these brain cells have been so impacted. Maybe we can at some point. At this point, we do not have the ability necessarily to, although it has been looked at, right? But what the main reason kind of why I wanted to go back to this slide was if we look at sort of the treatment. Sorry, that I'm going to go here. So at this point, when the plaque has already developed, it's already causing so much damage to the cells that we're less able to reverse out or regrow or fix. So the solutions for the treatment are probably to catch these problems before they become that the cell itself is damaged or damaged significantly. So it's a great question, and I'm an optimist. I would love for us to figure out how to regrow. That would solve a lot of problems for lots of different kinds of dementias and other traumatic brain injuries. But I think at this point, if we understand that when we see so much of this damage, it is sort of too late in the process to reverse out. So that's why we want to start early. So this is a plug. Our next presentation in our webinar series is about the importance of early detection. And the reason why that's so important is to try to catch these things early is because that's really the key place that we think we might be able to have an impact, right? Where we might be able to offer treatment or, we'll talk about that in our next webinar, but great question.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much for being here today. If we didn't get to your question, please again send us an email.